All right, time for a war story with Uncle Chris. I prefer the funny war stories if you haven't picked that up already. But this one does go back to the DMZ, and so if you've heard this one, stop me. I actually have two incidents with minefields. One in Iraq and one in the Korean DMZ, which happened much, much earlier. And I think that there's a bit of a lesson to learn from this one. Certainly there was for me. So story is that we're going out on one of our patrols inside the DMZ. There's a footnote here, and that is that an A-team from 3rd Group had come up from the Philippines, and they were working with us at this point. For about a month, I seem to recall, several weeks anyway. And so they were what's called shadowing the patrol. That just means that they were, walking with the APL all the way in the back. And we had what normally was an 11 or 12-man patrol. This one was a 14-man patrol. We were supposed to go do reconnaissance, which we had done all that day. After a full 24 hours of preparing for these patrols, they were exhaustive PCIs. They were 3 back-to-back 2-hour PCIs. So you go through quite literally 6 hours of pre-combat inspection. So we finally truck up, we get inside the DMZ, we dismount, we go into a patrol base, we do reconnaissance, we come back to the patrol base, and that night they dispatched 2 patrols to go do an ambush, a nighttime ambush. It was very, very common. All right, that's kind of the modus operandi. We did other things as well, but ambushes, and particularly in the summer, all-night ambushes were very common. So we were moving to do that. This was, I think, my very first night ambush, I seem to recall. And the reason I say that is I was on point. And I was in E1, E2 maybe, private E2, so very, very young. I think I had just turned 19. And let's just say I didn't have the greatest experience or confidence in some of my equipment, and namely my lensatic magnetic compass. Which has tritium and it glows and you can see what it's doing, and it's a very good quality compass, and of course it points towards the Hudson Bay, which in the Korean Peninsula is like 14 degrees off course, so you always have to convert your azimuth to your map azimuth, and it's a big mess, but I got used to doing all that. I was getting frustrated that night because we waited till sundown and we start off at night. We're going to go right up to the Korean border, what's called the MDML, or the Military Demarcation Line, MDL. And we're going to go really, really close to this and set up because the enemy, this is up by what was known as Infiltration Alley. And frankly, we'd had too much infiltration. And so we were going to go up there and disrupt that by ambushing the next team that came over. So we're going up there. And I'm getting frustrated with my compass because I'm arguing with it. And yes, I know that sounds stupid now when I say it, like someone had magically moved the Hudson Bay. But when you're just 19, you're convinced this piece of crap isn't working. It's either picking up my barrel, from my weapon systems, which are steel, and it's going to pull the magnetic, and I am tripping through 50 years of barbed wire and concertina on the ground as I move through a single canopy jungle on the side of a mountain. And so I'm going, my God. And so I just get so frustrated because I know in my mind where I'm supposed to be headed, and this thing is pulling me off. And so I just close it, shove it into my pouch, and I start walking. And I've got a better pace now, and everybody's real dark, and we're shoulder to shoulder. When it's that kind of darkness, you just grab the gear and the guy in front of you. So 14 of us chugging along, and I'm some private nobody leading the blind. And so you can see what happens here is that what I wind up doing is getting woefully off course because I'm walking on the side of a mountain. That's called a natural tendency to drift, and I was drifting up. And as we take a stop, you stop for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is to designate rally points, which is I think what we were doing, and I was waiting. It seems to me we're doing something like that. And I'm waiting for my squad leader to say, yeah, this is the rally point. Okay, let's keep moving. Instead, I hear some hushed whispers and a little bit of excitement, and what comes up to me on point is, dude, we're in a minefield. And I'm like, what? And they're like, I think you've walked us into a minefield. We can't tell if you're in it or out of it. And so they spread the word real quick. Okay, everybody roll up your sleeves, look for tripwires, and we just ever so slightly you go down to the ground. And I mean, just getting on your hands and knees can take you 5 minutes, right? Because you're moving all the leaves out of the way and branches and all this stuff. And we go to the ground in pitch blackness, and I'm feeling around. I'm like, I don't feel anything. And sure enough, the guy from the back, it's the special forces guy. He's like, hey guys, I'm on a bouncing Betty. Not on it, but he's like, I've got one right next to me. And we're like, you gotta be kidding. He's like, no, it's definitely, I can feel it. It's a bouncing Betty, got the 3 prongs. And he's like, and it's turned on its side. So over the monsoons, many different monsoon seasons that wash water and mud down the sides of these mountains, it had been relocated. So in my defense, we later find out that the minefield isn't exactly where it's supposed to be, but it doesn't matter. I'd gotten us lost and I'd walked us right into a minefield. Now, I don't remember who finds the next one. It might have been me, but I did find one. I'm like, dup, 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 dup. And I mean, this one was perfectly in the ground, you know, the 3 nipples up, the 3 little pointers. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I actually felt that. I don't know how, I'm like moving my hand slowly and I'm like, what the, and it's right in front of me. So there's a bouncing Betty. Now a bouncing Betty is a special kind of mine that shoots, there's an explosion that shoots it up between 1 and 2 meters high, and then it blows up and it sends shrapnel everywhere. With the Buffaloes in summer of 1986, as we were going up there, sure enough, we were told right away that one of the Manchus, the 1st of the 9th that are up there, had stepped on a bouncing Betty and it had blown up, killed him and killed the man behind him. So this was of, great concern, obviously. I mean, this is one of those butt-puckering kind of moments where if it wasn't already 102, I would have just been profusely sweating anyway. But of course I was profusely sweating because it was 102. I mean, it's the hot, sticky jungle kind of thing where your face camo isn't even staying on your face. So I find this nipple, I'm just like, oh my God. And I had to report it, yeah, I've got one too. Okay, mark it and move to the side. So we are literally, I don't know if you know how you do this, but you are pulling out a bayonet, and now we are all stabbing gently into the ground, and we're stabbing like this. And guys are doing it to the side because my body is providing, and I'm clearing just a little farther than my shoulder and hips, and I've got to stab this whole way in through the ground to find it. I found a second one. It also was just almost completely laying on its side. It was partially in, but anyway, and I'm like, wow. So I found 2 of the several mines that this 14-man patrol found that night, and we slowly dug ourselves up to the military crest of that mountain where there was a dirt road, and we got ourselves out. Once you're in the road, you're out of the minefield. And so we got ourselves out of that minefield. It took almost till nautical twilight. We got out in the darkness, but I remember only sitting there maybe 20 minutes and suddenly I could start to see things. The day turned blue and the sun would come up just another 30 minutes later. We were in civil twilight by the time we got out there. And again, I want to say it was somewhere around 11 o'clock at night when we realized we were in the minefield. And so to crawl that like 60, 80 meters and get all 14 of us out of there, that's what that took. I mean, it just took all night to do that. No injuries, no explosions. We all get out. I think we find something like maybe a half a dozen, 5 or 6 of the mines. Again, I discovered 2 of them, but I certainly wasn't the first one to discover it, nor did I realize I had walked us into a minefield. So as you can imagine, I got in a lot of trouble. I really did. Everybody hated me. I was everyone's least favorite. And my squad leader came up with a novel plan. And we're really new to the DMZ. You have a 90-day tour, and oh my gosh, I don't know how long we've been there. I'm going to say a couple of weeks. And he decided, you know what, that's it. I'm going to break you of that stupid tendency of you not to trust equipment that you've been trained on and is functioning. And yes, by the way, my navigation system was working. My compass was working just fine, just like everybody else's. And so he wanted to break me of that. And so he went ahead and said, yeah, you are point man for every mission we're going to run for the rest of this combat tour. And that's exactly what happened to me. By the way, I hate walking point. It's a miserable experience. You not only get, I don't mind spiders, but you get all the spider webs in your face. I hate spider webs, don't mind spiders. And you get all the snakes. And yes, there are a lot of snakes inside the Korean DMZ. And yep, I was always kicking them out of the way as we passed over rice paddies or dropping off of trees or bamboo. Real joy. But I'll tell you this, the moral of this story is Uncle Chris learned to trust his compass. You know, I really did. I not only learned to trust my compass, one of the other things I learned, serious takeaway from that was, as point man, I would look at our tracks and no longer just say, okay, 270, azimuth of 270 for 800 meters, azimuth of, 5 degrees for 1200 meters. I was no longer doing that. I was looking at that 800 on a map in a sand table, and I would look at the 1200. I would look at whatever we had to do, and I would actually go, okay, ridgeline. We pass over a ridgeline, we go down the ridgeline, we cross over a small creek. It may be dry, but this time of year it's probably going to be rushing because we're in the summer, and monsoons and all this other stuff. I would actually plot that out and go, okay, I'm doing this train association in my head before I ever even saw this train. I actually played that out in my head. I learned to do that so that as I moved through there, this terrain reference gave great references for me to check myself. And of course, I learned to dead reckon with that lensatic compass. So I got really, really good at terrain navigation. Let's just say that. So that was my first story with the Minefield. My next story, I'll tell you at another time, but it didn't happen until, good grief, the better part of 15, 20 years later. And you think once would be enough, right? And that's where you're wrong. All right, that story for another time. Thanks for joining War Stories with Uncle Chris.